Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Mail and Guardian's Google Hangout, where we discuss various issues making the headlines for the week. My name is Teldah Mawarie. I'm the Africa editor for the Mail and Guardian, and I'll be hosting this Hangout. For the Hangout, the Amnesty Director for Southern Africa, Deprose Muchena, was going to join us, but unfortunately, Deprose has had another commitment and is unable to join us today. But I will be joined by Obi Anyadike, who's editor-in-large for IRIN from Kenya. And I'll also be later on, we'll be joined by Liesl Louw-Vaudran. She won't be able to join us immediately, but a bit later in the Hangout. Liesl is an independent journalist, a researcher, and consultant for the Institute of Security Studies. So for now, are you, just before we start?
So I just lost you there. Did you say something to me?
Yes, I said, where exactly are you in Kenya?
Okay, I'm in Nairobi, sitting in my garden. Lovely day. Looking forward to doing this.
It looks beautiful.
It is.
Okay, so we might have a few technical challenges, some hiccups, so please, just bear with us. So what we want to focus on, Obi, is terror, particularly terror in Africa. So following the attacks in Baga in northeastern Nigeria, that some independent sources said about 2,000 people were killed and 50. I want us to kick off the our discussion off from there. There's this fixation with the numbers. Are we, as the media, and are people wrong in general in being fixated on numbers?
I mean, it's unfortunate. I mean, it's what we do. It's the numbers that help, in a sense, give a bit of meat to the story. Frequently, that's how we view it. But really, the numbers are an aside. It's the analysis should really be focusing on the trends, the consequences, and the context of the violence. I mean, if 150 people died or 2,000 people died in Baga, it's still terrible. The issue is what's happening, why this is happening, and to try and understand the challenges that everybody faces in these situations, and obviously to focus on the humanitarian consequences of this, which goes beyond just Baga and it goes beyond the killings. This has a ripple effect throughout the economy of northern Nigeria. It affects children who are out of school, people who've witnessed terrible events. It's a brutalizing and deeply, deeply traumatic situation that has lasted for years. And the inability of the military to get a grip on this is something that most Nigerians look on with shock and dismay.
This is one of the things, Obi, that I'm also finding about Boko Haram, that a lot of people suddenly just woke up to it because of this 2,000 number that is being thrown around. But really, this crisis has been going on for a long time. 3 states in Nigeria until November, I think, were under a state of emergency. People have woken up, which is good, but there are questions. So, for example, let's start maybe with a few from our claimed response for that attack. So here, Palesa has asked, what is the main wish of Boko Haram, and why are they using the ruthless method of violence to achieve their objective? If I can just add on there, if Boko Haram is a movement, as we see it is, and it wants to gain support to set up this independent state, how does violence help it achieve its ends?
I think we need to go into the history of this. As you said, this has been a long-running issue. Boko Haram started as a grassroots movement, which was quite popular in the north, but particularly Borno, which was kind of the birthplace of it. It was basically, we have them quite often in Nigeria. It's like a back to basics. It's a way of addressing, the corruption, the venality, that basically just hold on to your religion. Let's be fundamentalist about our faith, and if we do that, everything's going to come right. And it grew out of that. Though it professes not to have any political involvement, they were being used by the state governor at the time as a vote bank, and that soured. Things went wrong. There was some violence in which some Boko Haram guys died, and the guy called Mohammed Yusuf, who was the leader, vowed vengeance. He kept calling the Nigerian government to put to right what had happened. He wanted justice. That didn't happen, so his guys rose up, and that was the beginning of the violence. It didn't start essentially as a rebellion or an insurgency. It started as a social movement. What then happened is that Boko Haram has kind of morphed. At the initial stages, all they wanted was to basically the policemen who killed their followers, and also the leader Mohammed Yusuf, they wanted them tried. They wanted compensation for when the army came in and flattened their mosque and their buildings, and they wanted some kind of settlement which had been given to the Delta militants in southern Nigeria. I think there was an idea that you can basically, if the Nigerian government accepts that they did wrong, that'll be the end of it. That seemed to be the extent of Boko Haram's demands. As I said, it has since morphed, and under this particular leader, Shekau, it's a far more dangerous and ruthless outfit than it ever was. Secondly,
go ahead, Obi.
No, I was going to say, I mean, part of the problem was how the military responded to this. Nigeria's military have a history of winning hearts and minds by just basically flattening whichever area has risen up against authority. And that's what they did again, or tried to do in northern Nigeria. The idea was to shoot first, ask questions later. They didn't really differentiate between the community and Boko Haram, and they punished everybody. So in a sense, that drove followers to Boko Haram. The army was never particularly popular in that part of the country, or let's say the state wasn't particularly popular. And the army's tactics of breaking into people's homes at the dead of night in a conservative Muslim area, flogging members of the family in public, and also, as I said, shooting people whenever there was some kind of Boko Haram attack indiscriminately, that just drove followers to Boko Haram. And also the economic factor. The government's response to Boko Haram was to ban motorbike taxis, which is a real economic generator or income generator for a lot of young guys in the north. Basically those motorbikes are a way they can make some money, but the government feared that that's how Boko Haram was getting around and doing, well, right-by shootings, and so those were banned. And so young guys didn't have many other options. Here's a government that's oppressing them. Here's an army that is brutal. Boko Haram profess to be Muslims like us. We can understand where they're coming from, so they joined. That has changed, but that was the initial kind of impetus. That kind of drove support, and that was the early stages of the rebellion.
So, Boko Haram is not the only sort of like religious extremist organization that's currently causing terror the world over. There's Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Sudan. We see that in your country as well, there in Kenya. From the Nigerian government, it was very lukewarm. I think President Goodluck Jonathan actually condemned the Paris attacks before, under pressure. He came in to condemn what was happening in his own backyard. Do you think that the Nigerian government is not taking responsibility and ignoring this at the expense of elections, and that they think that this will work? Obi?
I think the Nigerian government has so mishandled this. It's been tragic. I mean, the first position of Goodluck Jonathan was to say that Boko Haram are ghosts. We don't know who they are. We can't negotiate with them. Then it was, these people are barbarians. There's no point in talking. And then it sort of morphed into some kind of, around his entourage, there's a feeling it's a conspiracy by northern politicians to scupper, undermine his government. He's misunderstood, mishandled, and it's been a disaster. In Boko Haram, along with Al-Shabaab in Kenya and maybe other movements, initially they're about justice. They're about social justice. It sounds kind of trite, but there's also an element of alienation felt by particularly young men. And in a sense, they're looking for some kind of meaning, it seems. And I hate to sound, like a cod psychologist, but if you talk to some of these guys, they truly believe that they want to have a better society. They want justice, and they feel that the current political system doesn't deliver that. But through Islam, or perhaps any other religion, I think we have fundamentalists in other religions, if you follow the tenets of your faith, you will have a better society. It is about how to end corruption, how to end all the wrongs that they see in society.
Thanks, Obi, for that insight. Let me just welcome Liesl, who I said is an independent journalist, a researcher, and has written this week as well in the Mail and Guardian on this issue of Boko Haram that we're discussing. Welcome, Liesl. Liesl, I can ask you. Muhammad Buhari of the All Progressive Congress, that is the opposition there in Nigeria, is really capitalizing on the attacks by Boko Haram, and he's promising that I think in the next 2 months or the next 2 years he will have done away with Boko Haram. This is a very bold promise. It's a very bold statement to make. Where will he get the resources? 1, 2, does he have this sort of military capacity? Liesl, just a moment, because I think we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah, welcome.
Okay.
Did you hear the question, the discussion?
Yes, I heard the question. Thank you. Okay. Yes, obviously that is the big question that analysts and observers are asking. The Boko Haram issue has become a propaganda issue between the two candidates in the election. I'm sorry I missed what Obi was saying earlier, but obviously there are high stakes in this poll, and the race is very tight, and both candidates are promising to wipe out Boko Haram. The capacity of the Nigerian military to deal with this insurgency that has been going on for a number of years now clearly has been found wanting, and it's difficult to see how, if there's a change of leadership, that overnight, one could see a change in how the Nigerian military and security forces are going to deal with Boko Haram. They've got such a bad track record, human rights abuses. There is the US arms embargo against Boko Haram. Now, some analysts are saying, well, buy arms from China or Russia or so on. I presume that's not absolutely the main issue that is hampering the fight against Boko Haram, which is very complex and has different levels, as I think you might have discussed already, rooting out the root causes of the insurgency, the unhappiness, the marginalized youth, the underdevelopment in the northeast of Nigeria. So these are also long-term issues which, a new leader in Nigeria might not, at least in the very short term, be able to tackle more successfully than his predecessor. I don't know what Obi might think of that.
Yes, Liesl, just there on the army, still with you, Liesl, on the military concerns. We see that where Boko Haram attacks, it's quite well equipped with modern machinery and that sort of thing. And the army in Nigeria and the joint forces seem to be kind of like falling behind a bit, as it were. Just talk a bit to this and tell us as well, if you can, about those 54 soldiers who are currently, I think, who were sentenced, I think, to death for deserting there in the north.
Obviously, a big question people are asking is where Boko Haram is getting all its sophisticated equipment from. Two scenarios. People are saying that a lot of their ammunition and so on have been looted from the Nigerian army. We saw in the beginning of January that with this attack, the first attack on Baga, they took over the base of the joint regional initiative against Boko Haram. So they've been looting some of their arms, and as well, the suspicion is, and there've been proof when France went in the northern Mali to fight the Al-Qaeda and the other extremist groups, there've been proof that that Boko Haram has links with the other groups. So presumably some of those heavy armaments that have been coming through from Libya, for example, after the breakup of the Libyan state and the fall of Gaddafi, have come through to Boko Haram. So it seems that the Nigerian army is lacking, but one must add that, especially after the kidnapping of the Chibok girls in April last year, there has been international assistance. We know there's a huge army presence, French military presence in Chad. There are the American drones. Last year, I don't know if you remember, there was a report that American planes have actually located the Chibok girls. So there is a minimum of international help there. As for the soldiers, yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah.
Okay. Obi, I just want you to just speak a bit more to the military angle, Obi. But I also want to ask you, Obi. Reader, a follower of ours on Twitter, George Mbokazi at GOMZA, has asked a very important question, that who is sponsoring Boko Haram? Because what we get is that Boko Haram also seems to have a lot of money, really. I spoke to one person this week who told me that where they recruit sometimes depends just the initial recruits before the actual battles are started. Who is sponsoring Boko Haram? Where are they getting this kind of money?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think some people in southern Nigeria will say it's northern politicians. I think one thing you might need to understand about Boko Haram is it seems it's franchises. There's several Boko Harams. There is one core Boko Haram around Shakal, but there's other seems to be subgroups as well. I think the first thing they do is they go in and go for the bank, loot the stores, take off the supplies that they need. So that's one aspect. But there's always the talk of some senior people having a hand in it, or some cross-border support that's also keeping them going. And I think in terms of the weapons they've got, I think Liesl was quite right. I mean, Libya, the weapons that have flowed as a result of the collapse of the Libyan state is one source. But there's this constant chat about Boko Haram having sophisticated weapons. They don't really. I mean, it basically is what they've managed to steal from the Nigerian army, or the Nigerian army has abandoned without destroying. So in the YouTube videos, the armored vehicles doing donuts are ex-Nigerian military armored vehicles. It's not that complex what they have.
Sorry, Obi, on that, they seem to have some sort of very sophisticated sort of grenades, because if you see from some of the Google maps that we saw, there were like whole areas that were burnt and destroyed. I mean, what are they using? What is that?
I think that could be just ordinary petrol and setting fire to the place. I mean, in terms of the military infantry, they haven't really. I mean, if you look at on paper what the Nigerian military has, they have, there's drone aircraft. We have Hind helicopter gunships, new armored fighting vehicles, which are mine resistant, from China. The infantry is quite impressive. The issue is on the front line, And if you talk to the soldiers themselves, and there was a recent letter written by an officer from Borno to President Goodluck Jonathan saying that the figures of soldiers are inflated, the units are not resupplied, what equipment they're meant to have is on paper, the fuel they're meant to have is siphoned off and used by the senior military guys to make money out of. So in a sense, you have a military which is existing on paper, but in reality on the front line, it's denuded. Morale has been severely hurt. It's disastrous in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Liesl, in your article today in the Mail and Guardian, you wrote about the response of the African Union and the response by the African Union chairperson, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, that this response only came on Monday, and this is like almost a whole week after the fall of Baga. You know, I want to talk about that on the African Union. Steele, who is on Twitter at Nom Tembu, asks us, why did Africa allow Boko Haram to gain so much strength? And why was there not as swift action as we have seen with Paris? So, you know, just talk to us about the African response in terms of the African Union and in terms of ECOWAS and of the Lake Chad initiative. Why does it seem to be slow and to be weak?
Yes, it definitely seems slow and weak. The Peace and Security Council of the AU is actually having a meeting today in Addis Ababa about it. And yes, it has come, all the statements were late. The ECOWAS has got certain counter-terrorism instruments that already in 2013 they adopted, the heads of state. And the African Union itself held a big conference on counter-terrorism, on terrorism on the continent in Nairobi at the end of last year as well. So it's not as if there are not instruments in place, meetings are being held, but yes, on the ground, one of the issues have been that Nigeria was almost saying we can do it on our own. I mean, if you compare with what happened in Mali, saying, you know, Mali called in the French and they came in with thousands of soldiers and basically not completely, but made rid the north of Mali at least of the immediate occupation of the armed groups of the big towns like Gao and Timbuktu and so on. So there was a different attitude from Nigeria, almost saying we can do it. And the regional initiative is there, the Lake Chad Commission, and Chad, Niger, Cameroon, and Nigeria. And they have started having patrols and so on. But, you know, if you ask the military guys, last year I was talking to some Senegalese generals there who were saying, look, the Cameroonians are doing it, and they're successful against Boko Haram, but the Nigerians can't do it. There's this rivalry, and it seems that there is a lack of communication in terms of sharing intelligence and so on amongst these various armies. So to be successful, the AU should coordinate the regional initiatives that are there, and the AU should be much more proactive. Should you know, speak to this quickly the day it happens. We should see these counter-terrorism measures implemented. Well, you know, it's unbelievable to wait, as you say, a number of days and then say, oh, we're horrified about what is happening in Nigeria. It's very disappointing.
Yeah. So I just want to stay with you know, this thing of the African Union. You know, Obi, to you, because you have on-the-ground experience in Kenya with the African Union mission in Somalia, AMISOM. You know, I want to find out from you, how effective are these African Union missions, and how big of a difference is it making, at least on the Kenya side where you are, in the fight against...
Okay, basically when you can't... The idea of a mission is to try and impose a space to negotiate. There has to be a political settlement at the end of the day. Militarily doesn't work. That just gives you some breathing room. But actually, I'm a Nigerian, so as a Nigerian, I just want to answer this issue. There's some deeper levels of analysis on this. I think initially, what everybody was asking the Nigerian government to do is negotiate with Boko Haram. And I think the Nigerian government always misunderstood Boko Haram. Every other movement that's arisen in Nigeria, the Delta is a great example, what they wanted at the end was to be settled. It's in Nigerian terms, it's a settlement. You make noise, you're difficult, and in the end, you get a bigger payout by the federal government. With Boko Haram, that doesn't work. They don't want to negotiate. There is nothing that the federal government can give them that they really want at this stage now. Maybe earlier on, it was, as I said, it was around the issue of acceptance of fault and some kind of recompense in that sense, a moral recompense. Boko Haram have no interest in the Nigerian state. For them, it's to create a whole new caliphate, which will be governed on Islamic principles. The next issue is, I think, the game changer, or potential game changer in Nigeria has been the rise of something called the civilian JTF. The Joint Task Force is the military's arm. They're the ones, there's a combination of police and army. It's the JTF are the ones who are doing the fighting, in a sense, in Nigeria, and a bit of the policing. What's happened is a whole civilian vigilante has grown up who are opposed to Boko Haram and who are supporting the military. Previously, in the 3 states, there was a huge degree of ambivalence towards the army or the JTF because, as I mentioned earlier, their counterproductive counterinsurgency approach. Now civilians who realize that the Boko Haram are killing more Muslims than Christians, are deadlier than JTF could ever be, have realized it's in their interests to try and stop the Boko Haram. So some of the hardest fighting has actually been done by the civilian JTF, and in every northern town in those 3 states, you'll see the civilian JTF manning the roadblocks. They're the eyes and ears of the military now. They're the ones who know who the Boko Haram guys are, and some of them are ex-Boko Haram. I think that's been critical. And I think, but back to the issue of corruption, I mean, I think Nigerians were at first dismayed by what was happening by the military. They thought it was the fault of the ordinary soldiers on the front line. What we see now is a great deal of sympathy for the soldiers and a realization that really it's a senior officer corps who are at fault, but who are deeply political as well. The Nigerian military isn't the professional outfit that it used to be. Senior officers join for financial gain, and as I said, they're deeply politicized. This cadre, this group of people, have proved themselves incapable to actually handle the situation. The idea, the hope is, in some quarters, that Buhari, being an extreme disciplinarian, that was how he was previously known, will be able to clean up the military. I think we all have to have our doubts about that, given the level of the corruption. But these are very, very complex and difficult issues to grasp.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the whole issue of terrorism in Africa is very complex. You know, I'm sorry, guys, we're going to have to just rush through this because of time. Liesl, you know, there was a huge storm on Twitter this week concerning the responses of the media over what had happened in France, the Je suis Charlie whole movement, if you'd like to call it that, versus almost made a complete silence on the Baga side, and accusations of racism in the media and so forth. So Sibusiso Biela at AstroSibs on Twitter is asking us, are reports and opinions of valid?
Sorry, Teldah, I couldn't hear the last bit of your question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Look, I think some of the criticism was there's this big storm bursting out of Johannesburg.
Yeah, on my side too, there's a huge storm coming.
It's lovely and sunny here, sorry.
Anyway, you know, coming back to the serious issue, is definitely, I think some of that criticism was justified. It has several reasons. I think the structure of how we consume media, even here in South Africa, you know, some of the other mainstream newspapers rely on European-based agencies for a lot of their news. People watch cable television that focuses on the you know, that was, for example, focusing on the Paris events rather than what's happening on our own continent. But that's an old story, and I think it is changing a little bit. But at the same time, you know, it was quite unprecedented what happened in Paris. And of course, then President Francois Hollande was the one who reacted and got 40 heads of state together to march in Paris. You had 2 million people gathering in Paris. We didn't see that coming out of Nigeria. Nigerians are fighting the elections, as we said earlier. It's been an ongoing tragedy of Boko Haram. I'm not saying Nigerians aren't proactive enough. I mean, there was the Bring Back Our Girls, and there are civil society groups. Fortunately, you know, groups like Amnesty International raised alarm. So I think it definitely is an indictment against a lot of media and African leaders who commiserated with France instead of saying, look, you know, we have the same problem here on our continent. Many of the leaders, we saw Macky Sall from Senegal, Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta was marching right next to François Hollande in Paris. There were others from Benin, from Togo, many African leaders who also do not respect press freedom at home, one has to add. You know, they went to France instead of focusing on the crisis here.
Okay, you know, still on the media, Obi, this week I tried to get a couple of journalists for the Mail and Guardian into the Northeast to do some sort of decent reporting and analysis from there, but nobody will go there. No one wants to go there at all. How cut off is the Northeast from the rest of the country? I mean, is it already operating as a separate entity, as it were, from the rest of Nigeria? Just how cut off is the Northeast?
Okay, if you look at Borno State, there's 27 local government areas. The government admits that 10 are under the control of Boko Haram, maybe 10, maybe 12. So about 40% of the north of Borno State is under Boko Haram's control. And in 2 other neighboring states, they have a couple of areas. But it's a very fluid situation. I mean, the military, when they're properly supplied, when they're properly led, they stand and fight and they win. They're far superior, really, in terms of equipment, if they're properly supplied and they have the ammunition they need. Sometimes they go into battle with just 60 rounds of ammunition and in soft-skinned vehicles, which is really no different from what Boko Haram has. So there's no advantage. But you know, Nigeria is big, and you know, there's northern Nigeria, and then there's like far north Nigeria. So Kano is north, and then you're on another 8 hours will take you to Borno, the capital of Maiduguri. It's huge, and in those far northern regions, cell phone lines are down because Boko Haram have blown them up. So it's very difficult to get through. For journalists, it's not only just a resource issue of getting from Kano to Maiduguri, but also, 1, Boko Haram going to kill you, and 2, the Nigerian army are not too friendly either towards you. The Nigerian army's performance has been so lackluster that really they don't want anybody reporting on what they're doing or not doing. So it's very difficult for a journalist, for a local journalist. I mean, the last time I was there, I mean, you can get to Maiduguri. Yes, you can get to Maiduguri. As I said, it's a long journey by road, but once you're there, it's difficult to get out.
You know, Obi, while you're still there on the modus operandi of Boko Haram, that's when they attack an area, one of the first things that they do is cutting off communications with the outside world. You know, we've sort of seen perhaps a new front in how they do things this week with the use of children They are not that they are not able to comprehend what it is that they are being used in. Are we seeing a new front, and why is Boko Haram turning to children? What's the logic, in your opinion?
The logic is purely for tactical reasons, especially girls. Women are not going to be searched so thoroughly, and children, people wouldn't suspect them. At least some of those kids who blew themselves up, their parents are actually Boko Haram. So they were ordered to by their parents to do that, which is distressing. But we also need to understand something that what drives Boko Haram has money. They do have money, and if you are going to pay somebody a few $100s, they will take that money. That region is the poorest in Nigeria, and for a few $100s, you will get recruits. And it's not just Nigerian recruits. You get recruits from across the border in Niger, where things are also fairly dire. So, especially as the economy collapses as a result of this insurgency, so Boko Haram are also getting more recruits. And that's a terrible kind of tragedy of it.
Great stuff. Just one more question as we come to a close. Liesl, you wrote in the Mail and Guardian this week about the election campaigning that's going on. It seems to be fully fledged, but I think a lot of people, maybe in the Northeast, are not going to be able to cast their votes because of fear and because of displacement, that people have been displaced, although there are disagreements over the number of displaced people. If the election goes, we risk of election, and the president can care or that the election might not be as valid as it would be to a new mandate.
Teldah, I'm sorry, we're having. I couldn't hear the last bit of your question, but if it is about the election going ahead in the Northeast, yeah, I think, as Obi said, maybe 40% then of Borno State is occupied by Boko Haram. So obviously people will not be voting there. But we know Nigeria's 170 million people, and obviously the election will be going ahead in the rest of the country. Maybe in the north, in certain parts, people will be scared of voting, but it seems as if Boko Haram is so anti the state and not concerned with whether people are voting and who they are voting for. It seems as if these two issues. It did look as though at the end, last year the Boko Haram tripled almost its number of attacks compared to 2013, and someone had said, well, this is looking, part of the tension in the run-up to the elections, and that the elections were somehow connected to this escalation of violence. So, I mean, in a way, obviously, if people are not going to vote, it will look bad for the Nigerian state as a state. And also, the fear driven by Boko Haram might discourage some people elsewhere in the country of voting. But I don't know. Now it seems as if these two are not as related. The escalation of violence of Boko Haram is not related to the election campaign. There's election violence, as we've seen before, buses being burnt down, and there's conflict in other parts that are purely election related and not Boko Haram related.
Okay, thanks very much. So just we're going to wrap up now. So Obi, in less than a minute, just tell me quickly, especially for Nigeria. And for Africa, what can be done to overcome Boko Haram in less than a minute?
Yeah, Nigeria has to solve this for themselves. This is a Nigerian issue, and Nigerians can handle it. The problem is the political process. The political system is so corrupted and so warped that that's what stood in the way. in a sense, it needs leadership, and I'm sad to say what's been absent in Nigeria at the moment has been firm, decisive leadership. I think our president has surrounded himself with people who don't understand the situation, who come from a very particular mindset, and what can be done is what's been asked by the broader North is to reach out to our region. Let's try and find a way that we can solve this problem. Boko Haram can be isolated. Boko Haram has made an enemy of the North and also northern religious leaders, the northern elite. They will kill them as well. This is not a Muslim-Christian war. This is an issue around an insurgency which has been allowed to grow, and it can be tackled. Militarily, at some stage you need to have a military response, but at the end of the day it requires a political response. The government has tried to address issues of unemployment, address issues of poverty, but it hasn't been coherent in its programming. That's the kind of thing that's going to tackle this. They've tried to take the kids off the streets who are prone to follow these religious leaders and put them into schools which provide a more all-round education. That's the kind of thing that needs to be done, and opportunities provided.
Okay, I'm going to have to leave it. Being very kind to us here, but Obi, it looks like it's nice and sunny there in Nairobi, Kenya. I wish we were there. But thanks. Those were panelists. That was Obi Anyadike, who is the editor at large of IRIN, and Liesl Louw, who's an independent journalist and researcher. There'll be much more coverage. There'll be highlights on the Mail and Guardian website as the weekend goes, and on Monday as well. So stay with us, visit us. We're there as well on social media. Keep talking to us. Thanks, everybody. Good day.
Bye.
Thank you.